So this is your opportunity to meet and visit with the people at Cengage, Top Hat, Pearson, CEI, VitalSource, Cavuto, Nebraska Book Company, Willow Labs, Carlton Technologies, and Logan Canada. So come prepared with your questions and take some time to meet with each of these vendors. The second session on Thursday is our third session of the GM vendor presentations. So we have another 8 vendors presenting that day, and I encourage you again to please join and attend these sessions. Our vendor partners are still very important to CSE, and we need you also to be there and show some support back to them. Our full conference lineup is, by the way, on your member space calendar, and there you'll find links to each of the sessions, and when you open them up, you'll see the session descriptions in there as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Clark, who's going to introduce today's keynote speaker. So Mike.
Thank you, Greg. Today it's my pleasure to introduce our opening keynote speaker. Over the past year, post-secondary institutions have transitioned from in-person learning to remote learning necessitated by campus closures and health safety regulations. From the perspective of campus administration, how has this disruption created opportunities in education, and where are the needs for improvement to better serve our faculty and students? Dr. Tara Hyland-Russell, Vice President Academic of St. Mary's University in Calgary, is with us today to share her experiences during this time of uncertainty. So please help me by welcoming Tara Hyland-Russell. Tara?
Well, thanks so much, Mike. And I'm looking at all your names and remembering many of you from last year when we were actually able to meet in person in Niagara Falls. So it's so good to see your names and some of your faces there.
Thanks, Tara. Today we'll be having, it's going to be more of a question and answer. We've CSE's composed about 12 to 15 questions we'll be asking Tara. Please feel free to jump in at any time. Tara is very open about relationships on campus and how they work. So if you have any questions about your campus and maybe ideas that can help you guys out, please jump in. Just raise your hand and Steve or Greg will let me know. That'd be great. So thank you for joining us today for this year's virtual conference. We had the pleasure to hear from you at last year's Niagara Falls. What did you take away from that conference when you returned to St. Mary's?
Oh, that's a great question, Mike. I had a greater appreciation for the work that all of you do, and an understanding that if we're wise as administrators on university and post-secondary campuses, we'll spend more time talking with you and getting your insight. You often have your finger on the pulse of how students are doing. You have great ideas, and I have learned so much about your side of the operations that I think I would like to see more post-secondary administrators be aware of.
Super. Can you tell us about St. Mary's University, your role, and the institution as a whole?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Mike. We have about 1,200 students. We're a small liberal arts university in Calgary. We're one of the 26 in the post-secondary sector here. My role right now is Vice President Academic and Acting Dean of Arts and Sciences. And so anything to do with student services or academics is in my portfolio, including library, all of student services, recruitment, admissions, all of it.
Super. This will be the big question because all of our roles have changed for everyone on this call. How has your role changed during the past year?
I have spent a good third to a half of my time working on COVID emergency response. So everything from working with facilities about how to build plexiglass sugar cubes for students on campus, trying to figure out signage, working with Alberta Health Services about developing protocols, being able to turn on a dime every time the provincial health regulations changed, working much more closely with the registrar's office to say, okay, are we doing exams in person, which we were going to do in December, and then 2 weeks before exams, we had to change dramatically because of the changing health regulations here. So I had been over the past 3 years getting more deeply into emergency response, but this was a whole different scale. Alongside that, a much deeper immersion in IT, software, hardware, speed of faculty internet connections at home, like just so many details. Kind of mind-boggling this year, but I'm sure you all know that.
Thank you. Thinking back to March 2020, what were some of the challenges for your institution when lockdowns were implemented, from both like what you see from the student's perspective and from faculty staff perspective?
Mm-hmm. Probably one of the biggest things for us is because our brand is small face-to-face classes, and we had little to no expertise on campus about instructional design, teaching online. It's not one of our values, frankly. So in the space of a week, we had to turn from being face-to-face to being remote. 98% of the faculty had never taught online. Some of our faculty don't even have cell phones. So we didn't even have the language. So when we started talking with them about pedagogy and do you want to teach synchronously or asynchronously, nothing. So that was our biggest challenge, frankly, is that we didn't have the infrastructure. Now, fortunately, our IT director is very forward-looking, and he had spent the previous 4 months trying to introduce a new learning management system. So we were using Moodle. The version we had was out of date. We were going to get hacked. We had a lot of security concerns. And so he'd already started moving us to D2L and Brightspace. And we had some very tough conversations, and people were highly emotional about it, did not want to move. But then we actually transitioned to online in the space of a week. And all of a sudden, thank God we had been talking about this and had it somewhat implemented. So that was a really positive, something positive that really came out of the rapid transition. Students, I know there have been conversations across all of our campuses. Students didn't understand that once we moved remotely, that we had more costs. They wanted us to cut our fees. They wanted us to not charge computer fees. But this led to some really, really good conversations with the Student Legislative Council, where we were able to say, actually, you know what, we call this a computer fee, but it's not sufficient. And so since then, we've actually revised our fees and been much more clear about what those fees cover. Another challenge of transitioning so quickly, and we closed down campus on March 13th. We actually closed it down a little bit earlier than some of the other PSCs in Alberta, which I think closed on the following Monday. But we'd had a really complex student issue going on. And so everyone in student services and many of the faculty, we were dealing with this really complex issue. So we were actually sitting in the boardroom trying to deal with this issue and intervention as we're trying to decide when and how we're going to close down the campus, and all the people making the closure of the campus decisions and how to go remotely were the same people who were involved in this other major decision. So we're small, so it was pretty intense at the time.
Thank you. For all of us, at the beginning of the pandemic, we a lot of us, I think, thought it was just going to be a sprint. As we all know, it's going to be a marathon for everyone. How do you feel that this has impacted our campus, and how do you feel it's impacted, I guess, campuses across Canada more so?
There's a lot more conversation now about what's going to happen even when there's herd immunity, when people can be fully back on campuses. Is post-secondary ever going to look the same? And I think that that's possibly the biggest question that's lurking in all of our minds. I know that a lot of our faculty are assuming we're just going to go back to normal. I don't know how realistic that is. I think there are going to be a lot of deep and thoughtful conversations. Ancillary services have changed. What's going to be left? Certainly, we've discovered here that a lot of people can work from home just fine. We're out of office space. We need to do some capital building, but maybe we don't need to do as much as we thought. Maybe we can have more staff working from home and sharing office space. One of the impacts is we've discovered that in some ways, meeting the needs of accommodated students is actually easier with the technology. A lot of questions.
Yeah. So we have some questions in the Q&A, which I'll save after the next question. I'll ask those too. How do you strategize communicating with the students, staff, and faculty on the campus for St. Mary's? And is the message the same to all levels?
I would say that that's probably one of the most important learnings right now is about communication. And we hear it all the time, right? Clear, frequent, transparent communication. I would say that's been the number one most important element during COVID. Last August, at the beginning of August, I started emailing students, the whole student body, every Friday, just to let them know what the fall semester was going to look like, which classes were going to be in person, where they could get their materials from the bookstore, how the library was going to deliver services. And, even to the point where I was sending out a list of, here are the classes that are going to be in person. Here is all the COVID protocol. Here's what you need to do. And partway through the term, I started doing it just every couple of weeks. But students reached out and said, actually, we need that. We want you to keep this up. This is really important. They started sending in questions. They started sending in topics they wanted to address. And now it's become a really important forum for conversation. And early on, some of the student services and faculty had asked me to forward them a copy of what I was sending in the Friday message to the students, just so that they could understand the messaging and be consistent. And then I was getting feedback from people, in accounting. Some of the bookkeepers said, I wait for your message every Friday because I feel that I'm part of it. And I would start sending funny memes about mask wearing or, little videos. As the term evolved, I would give students study tips, that kind of thing. And it's ended up being a really important communication that now I just do every week. And it's created this kind of online community in a way we really did not anticipate. But it did show us that we had to be really consistent with our messaging across the whole campus, and that people don't just know things. There was so much confusion about what Alberta Health Services was saying versus what the post-secondary sector was allowed to do. And the fact that people know that the same day every week they're going to get an update. They don't always look at it, but they know it's there. And that has been very helpful. We've also started monthly online town halls with the students. And again, we involve senior administration, so the president and I are there, and also the executive for the Student Legislative Council. Super. And that is developing some momentum, and it is assuring students that we are listening and that they have a voice. And I think that's the biggest thing that we learned during the first term, the first full term that we were remote, is that students felt just lost. They felt disconnected. Their anxiety went through the roof. And that if we can put in these consistent structures, that makes them feel grounded enough that they can focus on their academics.
Super. I just had someone just text me, just a quick follow-up question to what you said. Do you guys have a formula of seeing how many students actually open the emails? Because at their campus, they said they send out emails to their students, but they never read them.
I think it's the only way I can track it, because I mean, IT might know, I don't actually know, but I can tell you that in August, when I started sending out messages about what classes were going to be online, what we're going to be in person, and then later in the term, sometimes I would get hundreds of responses. So I know that the students are reading them. And now that it's set up as a weekly thing, so a couple weeks ago, I got a question from a student, an email question, asking about something. I said, you know what, it's in my Friday email. check it out. The other thing is the registrar now asks IT to post each of the Friday messages on our website under our COVID link. So we can always drive students to that. And this was a strategic decision made through the COVID emergency response team, that we early on made the decision that there had to be one consistent message, and that we determined who was going to be the point person for any information going to students. Because the last thing we wanted was conflicting information going out.
Super.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Kevin Brown.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if this is applicable to the university or not, but Tara, have you had conversations about students operating remotely offshore and looked into issues of course materials that are not available due to sanctions? Curious if this is something that's considered or happened on your campus.
Not so much for us. We currently don't have too many international students offshore. Some of our international students actually stayed here in Alberta. We've had time zone issues more than sanctions, but I have heard from some of my colleagues about this issue.
Okay. And then we have another one from Chad. It says, hi, Dr. Hyland-Russell. It's nice to see you. Now that so many faculty members and students have made the transition to remote or hybrid learning, are both willing to go back? And then there's a second question. I'll follow up after that.
That's a really good question. Most of our faculty are waiting to get back to face-to-face. So one of the challenges that our faculty have found, and I hear this echoed from faculty in other institutions, is that students frequently do not want to turn on their video. And so the faculty feel that they're just like teaching into this void. So it's one thing, you know, I can see many of your faces now, but can you imagine doing a 2 or 3 hour class and just, hello, are you there? And that's been really tough. We've done a number of surveys with students and faculty to see how they're doing, what was working, what wasn't working. Some students are finding, interestingly, this is one of the most interesting findings, is that some of the students with high anxiety are actually finding the remote environment much easier for them. So the other thing is students who have children in particular, and who are having to deal with students having to be self-isolated at home for 2 weeks every time there's a case in the school. So there's no continuity of care. So parents are working part-time, they're going to school maybe, they've got kids at home. Remote learning has been a boon for them. And I certainly have heard from a number of students that they would love that flexibility in the future. That they don't want to drive all the way down to campus just for one course when they've got childcare issues, etc. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think we're going to work on a survey, just another update survey soon to say, hey, what's working? What are you thinking? Unfortunately, it looks like we might have to be remote again in September. So we might have to look at that sooner rather than later.
I don't know if you want to elaborate, but you've answered the second question, which are both groups on the same page, or is one more willing than the other?
There's no consistency. So the survey we did about a month ago, when we were asking students how many would like to take spring summer courses remotely and how many would come to campus, because we know or suspect that the protocols are going to be more relaxed in the spring or summer. We can have some classes outside. We can have windows open. I think people are just going to remember what it was like last summer. We could have more outdoor gatherings, etc. And it was about 50-50. 50% of the students want remote, 50% want in person. And our faculty, we still had quite a number of faculty who were prepared to teach in person on campus in January, until Alberta's numbers really skyrocketed in December. And now we have only a small handful in person, although we've had 0 on-campus cases of transmission. So we've been really, really safe. So it's a mixed bag. I suspect that we're going to get a high number of students saying, I would like there to be some remote classes going forward. It's just easier.
We have another question. It's from Imelda. It says, who is responsible for communicating to staff on your campus?
About COVID, or
just the general messaging that's going out to the students? Is it through your office? Is it through communications? Is it like professor to student, those kind of things?
right? So anything that's connected with students or the academics, I send out. Because the Friday messages have been effective, the COVID task team has just said, yep, send them on to faculty and staff. There's no sense duplicating. Whenever there's a change in health protocols that we have to communicate, the COVID task force gets together and we decide. So at the beginning, it was Advancement in Communications who was drafting them. But because we want absolute consistency, I often draft them and then we decide who's going to send them out.
And that's why.
Super. So we'll go back to the questions for now. We don't have any Q&A at the moment. What is the feedback you're getting back from faculty and students about online learning? So you've touched on that. And do you think the COVID-19 will change universities and their educational delivery models moving forward?
I both believe and hope that we will look really carefully at what we're doing and why we're doing it, so that we're not just looking at revenue models, but we're looking at what's best for students. What's been really interesting to me, and some of this might be unique to our institution, although I suspect it's not, and this connects with the discussion we had last year with a lot of the academic publishers going to an online delivery model. Because students have felt so unmoored in this remote pandemic world, they seem to be wanting more print materials, not less. I don't know what you're finding in your bookstores, in your ancillary services, but any of the students I'm talking to are saying, you know what, everything is so up in the air, everything is so ephemeral. I really want to be able to get my hands on something print. I want to be able to highlight it. I want to be able to work with it that way. We ended up working with science. So we have kept many of our science labs in person and have protocols all around that. But the other piece is we created small lab boxes with equipment and materials that the students bought through the bookstore. And then they could do some of their labs at home. So we tried to keep a rotation going so that students weren't on campus more than once every 2 weeks, just to make sure that if there was any transmission, it broke the cycle. And students loved it. They absolutely love these little science lab boxes. So there seems to be an important piece about connecting through material objects that helps them feel like they're not forgotten. So even as we take advantage of some of the positives for remote learning going forward, I think we might need to consider how to balance that.
Super. We have another question. It's from Carla. It says, I'm wondering if you can speak further to the changes in ancillary services that you see going forward, considering that the old normal will not be. How do you see the ancillary services changing overall?
To me, that's a really critical question. We know that a lot of universities rely on the revenue from ancillary services, but it's more important than that. It really helps create the community. I don't know about all of you, but we closed down our food services. There hasn't been anything since, I don't know, forever now. Bookstores, we're still doing curbside pickup. We do allow students into our bookstore. In fact, we're trying to drive students to our bookstore because we want to keep it open. We want to keep as many staff working as possible, and we want students to have access to materials. I do think this is going to change. And I wonder, I've been really tracking in Calgary where people are spending their money and what's important to them. And I don't know if this is unique to Calgary, but younger people in our sort of generation of students seem to be caring a lot about the environment. And so package-free stores, places where you can refill products, they are stores that have been thriving despite the lockdown. I know there's been a lot of conversation about the impact of plastic on the oceans, etc., all the plastic masks. What's going to happen with all of these pieces afterwards? I wonder if we can radically look at some of our ancillary services and say, what have we learned? What are the core values of the students attending our institutions? And can we tap into that? And I know that that's got huge implications for all of you. I know that we had ordered a bunch of product from last year's conference, and because of supply chain issues, a lot of stuff made in China was delayed. I'm wondering how radically we can step back and look at this and say, can we, in fact, keep doing what we've been doing? Or is this an opportunity to really look at aligning whatever our institutional values are and our social values, and maybe shift our models just a little bit?
Super. I received another text question, and it might put you on the spot a bit. How do you feel about ebooks in the classroom? As you mentioned, that print is very important. As you know, there's direct-to-student models out there now. Do you feel the learning experience is the same?
I'll tell you what students tell me. And I have 3 daughters who are currently in post-secondary, 3 different institutions, 3 different disciplines. And we've done a lot of surveying of our students. They do not like it. I know why it's being done, and while I like the access, theoretically, the broader access that it can provide to students, most faculty also do not like it. And I will admit a bias, because my area of specialty is English literature, and I simply can't imagine teaching a book that's not in my hands and that I mark up. I think some disciplines, some of the materials are excellent. So one of my daughters is in nursing, and there's some color models and stuff that are just amazing. But she had to buy a brand new computer that was actually able to manage all the images. Yeah, I would love to see us try to keep a space for print material in the way that we support independent bookstores, because it's really important to keep that access to a much broader range of materials. I think there is such a danger if only a few companies end up providing our textbook materials. We've seen what happens with the big box bookstores. You simply do not get the range. You don't get the access to the diverse ideas. You don't get the quality. So what can we do? I don't think it's going to go away, but are there ways we can say, let's at least preserve some space for these other kind of materials? I would advocate very strongly for that.
Super. What was your experience with learning technologies prior to online learning, and how was the decision-making process for your institution when adopting all these new technologies?
Well, we were in some pretty tough conversations before COVID came. So COVID actually helped us flip to using technology quite handily. So our faculty have been amazing. They haven't complained. They've certainly had tons of struggles, but they knew the reality. We did have to invest a lot. We hired 2 instructional designers. We had a series of workshops that we recorded, made available to faculty. We hired someone to be a one-on-one person that faculty could just book times. Some faculty had never done anything online. Some, not too many, but a couple even struggled with doing remote email from home. So for some, we really had to walk them through. And then we did the last couple of weeks before the first full term. So in August, we did what were called 3-2-1 sessions. and that in 30 minutes, we would address 2 very specific topics. So how do you input your grades? How do you post a course outline? And we did that for a week, couple weeks, published them. So faculty knew exactly, they could spend half an hour, they could join and get walked through exactly what they needed. And that really, really helped. So we were very, very proactive. I have heard from some other universities who are a little bit less proactive that was a big deficit for them, and faculty really struggled. We've worked, of course, really closely with IT. Our IT department was amazing, but worked incredibly long hours and created all sorts of really helpful how-to sheets for the faculty. So we would send out these how-to sheets, and again, we were consistent in how they went out, and that's also been very, very helpful.
Super. How do you see September back to school compare with January, in your opinion, for this year?
So this coming January or coming September, or
the September that just passed,
right?
To like they said, it was a sprint, and now it's a marathon.
Yeah. Well, I will say that things went really, really smoothly in January. When leading up to the September start, I was terrified. There were so many pieces we'd never done before. And even, the classes that we had in person, the protocols, would students come? What do we do when our education students are out in practicum and there's a case in a school? Like, there were so many questions. And at that time, we didn't even know whether the province was going to recognize online practicum placements as counting towards the accreditation of teachers. So there were some really big, important questions. But it all went well. December exams went incredibly well. So starting in January, it was really smooth. And I think faculty and students had realized, okay, numbers were crazy here in December. People were frightened. And so it's like, okay, this is the way it is right now. We will just make the best of it.
So I received another text question. It says, it appears you're very open to collaboration. How would you suggest to demonstrate our relevance on campus? Many of us have had to cut our budgets, and it always seems ancillary services gets hit. How do you feel, or how would you start that conversation with our superiors that we are important and a student service?
That is an excellent question. I probably wouldn't start with your superiors. Have you talked to your recruiting people? So one of the hardest pieces this year during COVID is we cannot recruit face-to-face. And in Alberta, the ELA tour was done virtually, and frankly, it sucked. Like, it's just not working. And it's very hard for anybody to get in front of students. But you have that retail link with students, you have an online presence with your students, you are probably much more adept at social media than some other divisions in the university. I guarantee that if you have any connections with student services and recruitment, they would love any assistance. So someone in Mike's department built a whole social media plan for his unit. Our recruitment people weren't particularly social media savvy. So I asked Mike if he'd be willing to share the social media plan with student services with recruitment, which he happily did. And then we've just been building on expertise. So instead of training up all of recruitment, we simply just built on what they were already doing. We also needed some fast turnaround for some extension courses. Didn't really have the online payment system filled out or figured out, so we're doing it through the bookstore. So if you can offer yourselves as a service entity to the other departments that are frankly struggling and have way too much work and no resources, I think that would help. You guys have got great ideas.
The follow-up question was, in Alberta, in Ontario, there's discussion now, but in Alberta, is there discussions about a possible double cohort of students from graduates from high school last year who have not gone to university this year?
It's more this coming year we're worried about, actually. So I've been watching the numbers in Ontario, and the latest numbers to come out from Ontario last week is that applications are up for this coming fall to the big universities, which is somewhat counterintuitive. And I'm not sure what that means. I just met with all the senior academic officers across Alberta on Friday, and across the board, applications from grade 12 graduating students this year were down. So down considerably for the fall. So there's starting to be conversation about a lost generation, and that students may be electing not to come in the fall and waiting to the next year. So I think the double cohort may come in fall of 2022. But it's so up in the air. I don't know how much you talk with recruiters and look at the trends. The trends are all off this year. It's almost impossible to predict. So we're not sure yet whether it's just a lag or whether students are stepping out of post-secondary for the coming year. We actually ended up ahead by 7% this year. We just got the final numbers last week. So we've been able to retain more of our continuing students. Our concern is with those who are graduating this year. And I've even talked to parents, some of parents of graduating grade 12s who are our staff who are saying, yeah, I'm telling my kid not to come this year, like this coming fall. So I think this coming fall is going to be very telling. I think it's going to be hard. So if there's anything you can do now to support recruitment, that would be gold. Like we're counting applications, recruiting registrations for next fall, and working so hard to get anything in. So if there's any way that you can support your recruitment and retention, that would be fabulous.
What support systems did you implement for your campus community, if any, for this year?
Yes, lots. Tons of training, and I talked about that. Checking in on people. Staff were great IT at making sure people had what they needed at home. We did a quick survey with faculty and staff who had to move remotely. Do you have webcams? Like we had to order a bunch of webcams and we would deliver them to people. A couple of people needed the movable stand-up desks and facilities to drop them off at people's houses. A really important piece was prioritizing and taking tasks off the table. So student services and IT have just been stretched beyond belief. And so partway through last term, I kind of looked at people and said, you know, you look like you're really struggling. And they're like, yeah, I can't do anymore. So we would sit down and look at what had to be done and say, okay, you know what? SMART goals for this year, forget it. It's kind of irrelevant. What are the things that have to be done? And then at the same time, what are the things that really give you joy and energy? So we've started doing really crazy. I have a weekly student services meeting. And so, you know, start sending out or asking questions during the meeting. And okay, you just want a blizzard to DQ, like nothing big, but it's so joy, focusing on resiliency. We've started doing a lot of support for our students in terms of food cards, food boxes. A lot of our kids are suffering if they're still at home and their parents have lost jobs. So really looking at what's essential. And if it's not essential, you know what? It's going to wait. And taking care of our people, checking in and saying, you know, you've been working so much overtime just to get this stuff going. Please take Friday afternoon off because we need you to stay well. So asking people what they need, right? There are people who have lost family members. There are students who have had parents go into ICU and some sadly not make it through. So we've been very flexible with supports for students. If a student is ill or not able to come or attend a class because of self-isolation, or one student had to move back home and take care of his younger siblings because his mom was in ICU with COVID, we are not making them go and get a doctor's note, right? It's like, okay, we trust you, we believe you, what do you need right now? So flexibility, seeing people as humans, asking them what they need, humor. And at last week's student services meeting, we decided that from now on, the rest of this term and going through spring and summer, it's all going to be about resiliency, and it's going to be about how do we make ourselves stronger. So no wringing of hands about, oh, this sucks, because that's not helping anybody. And not Pollyanna either, recognizing what's tough and giving very concrete supports. And again, I think we're trying to support the ancillary services. So the town halls for students, I found a little bit of my budget, and we're giving out gift cards. We're doing draws and giving out gift cards to the bookstore. So again, tell your leaders what you need. I mean, Mike was really clear. He said, you need to drive students to the bookstore. So I insisted that we have in-person new student orientation back in September. Did my student services people like it? And I said, actually, this is really important. We will do it safely. I will support whatever you need to do if you need to spread it over 3 days. But we need the ancillary services. We need the students to connect. We need them to believe that they're post-secondary students, and we need the revenue. And I don't want to lay off anybody who doesn't need to be laid off. So I get it. This is freaking you out. What do you need? We'll make it happen. So if I need to get in there and roll up my sleeves and carry boxes for new student orientation because the team needs to know that I'm there and I'm not just making them do the dirty work, that's what I do.
That's fantastic. Which areas do you see that need improvement moving forward?
Can you focus that a little bit more for me? Like, what do you mean online? Do you mean post-secondary in general?
Just the biggest thing is, what can we as universities be better at because of COVID? As you mentioned, communications was a huge one that have come out of this. Is there anything that you also think that, hey, this is another avenue that because of the pandemic that we're able to now explore or put revenue into to develop?
I suspect that moving forward, post-secondary and the individual institutions plus the sector as a whole are going to really need to define their purpose and their value to the community. And you have a key role in that. So not just branding the sort of varsity part of the university. So I guess my question would be, what can you do to engage in the conversation and to help promote and differentiate your institution? Because, and I mean, in Alberta, it's very much what can you do with a degree, and that's important, but that's not the whole thing. So what can you contribute to meeting the mission of your particular institution, and how might that look different from what you're doing before? And since all universities now have had to develop different online systems, are there any ways that we can integrate some of those and make them more seamless?
Perfect. What are the wins that your campus experienced? And besides maybe some revenue generation that we've all experienced, what are the losses?
Well, we've had to invest a ton of money into software, hardware, training. That's been really tough. I don't know what's going to happen going forward. I'm really worried about recruitment and enrollment for next year. We're looking at remaking our whole food services because we just don't know. Our contractor just couldn't afford to not work. So we have to almost start from the beginning there. But I think what's been more surprising to me is how it's actually focused people here on what are our core values. And there's almost a celebration of how well we've been able to not just maintain our community, but keep building it. And in a lot of ways, and I'm really curious to know if this has happened at your institutions, in a lot of ways, this has made our community stronger and help people focus on what really matters. And so some of the petty, there might be an ego or two at some academic institutions, and a lot of those more minor differences seem to have gone by the wayside. And to me, that's something to celebrate and something that's really important to keep a hold of, and not to lose touch with as we come back on campus.
So for every problem, there's a solution or another question that might come out of it. What do you see the biggest hurdle still coming down the road?
Well, it's going to be revenue, right? It's going to be what's left afterwards. Who's going to pay for all of these COVID bailouts? What's happening in different provinces? What's going to be the impact long term? And what does that look like? In Alberta, it's pretty scary right now. And I know it is in different provinces are faring differently. And I think for me, the biggest question is, are we going to hold on to an outdated model of what post-secondary looks like? Or are we going to use this moment to start thinking about what we want to hold on to and how we can reinvent ourselves? And because you are the people who tend to have a lot of that entrepreneurial thinking, I think you could be really important to this conversation.
And the other big one is, are there changes that have happened from COVID? And do you think this will continue as a new normal university operation moving forward?
I certainly think there's going to be more ongoing attention paid to the whole facilities safety side of things. I think the institutions that had really good emergency protocols in place are thanking their lucky stars. And I think going forward in terms of health protocols, being able to respond, that's going to be really critical. And that side, I think, will become more robust and more visible. I think people or organizations are looking at remote work from home policies and processes. They're also considering, do we have enough coverage? Do we have enough depth? If somebody suddenly gets sick and can't work, do we have the coverage? And or do we have enough kind of cross training? So I think there's been some flexibility or some recognition that people can work cross-departmentally, and maybe we need to do more of that. So I'm hoping that there will be less siloing, and I think there is that opportunity to be less siloed, but it'll be up to each administrative unit, I think, to see if that's going to happen. I know that some post-secondaries are talking about cutting programs. I think that's a tough conversation. And again, if we talk about civil society and what kind of conversations are critical, what role do we have in trying to preserve maybe some low enrolled programs, but that are really important to our conversation as social beings in Canada? I think we might need advocates to say, how do we keep some of these really important dialogues going? Or are we only going to look at dollars and cents for our post-secondary?
So we have a couple minutes left. If anybody has a question for Tara, they're more than happy. You can unmute. If you have one, I'll give a minute for that if you do.
I also have a question for you, all of you, is what do you want from your administrators? Like what do I need to know about what you're facing? How can we help you? How can, if I get together with a whole bunch of other VPAs, what can I do to raise your concerns, to say, hey, can we do whatever? What do you guys need?
So, Mike, we have some hands raised in the. We have Loda, Stephen, and Emily as well.
If you don't mind just directing those, Greg, that'd be great.
Sure. So does Loda have a comment there?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Tara. It's been super inspirational. So I can not only say, Mike, you are super lucky to work with that kind of administration. It's just a lot of insight and great leadership. So thank you. I think that because I represent a very large university, UFT, so our challenges are very different to yours. And I would say that what the administration needs to be sometimes reminded that we have the joint common goal. It's student success. And what does the future look like? And sometimes they think it maybe is as evident that we are on the same page and we really want to make the academia successful. And unless there's a good collaboration, we can't support that vision. So that's what I would say, that, and especially with the technology changes, with the very powerful and money-hungry publishers, it's a difficult space to maneuver with little resources.
Agreed. I know that's a challenge. And, I remember a number of years ago when all the sort of electronic databases and the middlemen sort of all started gathered, and we got caught in that when one of the vendors went out of business, and we lost 18 months worth of resources that we couldn't afford to pay again. And I wonder if there is a way to get other stakeholders engaged and passionate about this. If we could get faculty on board and start raising some stink, I wonder if it would make any difference.
I wonder the same question almost every day because that's I think that's the biggest question that we have. But I'm going to stop there. But I'm just going to say thank you, and I'm inspired.
Well, I love hanging out with you guys, and I'm really appreciative of being able to enter into this space and conversation, because I continue to learn from you. And you're right, we're all engaged in student success. So how do we grab that momentum and work together?
Okay, I have a comment from Stephen L. Steve, go ahead.
Thanks, Tara. Thanks for that, and I agree wholeheartedly with Lota that we definitely wish to be engaged and at the table, and I think that's my request. As we see the university push forward with initiatives through the library and through faculties, without considering what our capabilities are. We've been trying to deliver. We've been participating in delivering free content, and we're trying to develop platforms, and we're trying to, be more consistent and maybe a common platform that might work. But we're finding that we have to develop 3 different digital platforms and all different forms of delivering course material, I think because the conversations are happening without us at the table in many cases. So I think our request is just that we remain at the table and we remain in the conversation as often as possible.
So would that happen through your provost, or?
That's it would happen on a number of different fronts. I know we have to connect with faculty. We have to connect with libraries. We have to connect with the provost in order to drive that. I think just too many initiatives start up because they have an idea, they take it in a direction, and then we have to play catch up at the end to figure out how to deliver the materials, when maybe our input at the beginning might be might at least help us make it more logistically reasonable for all.
So how closely are most of you connected with IT?
Some probably better than others, but I won't speak for everyone. I think it's all over the board on that one.
Quite closely, yeah. And you're right, the academy is often very bad at siloing, but if there's anything that should come out of this COVID experience, it's that we're going to thrive much better if we have that collaboration. Because you're right, there's no need to come in at the end of the conversation and be told you need to implement something that wasn't very useful.
So in that light, is your recommendation that we align better with the provost office?
I think so. And of course, there are different structures in different institutions, but it's the provost or the VPA who's going to connect you with the faculty. And I think, reaching out and saying, look, we're all about student success, and how can we help your student and faculty be successful? And how do we save time? I know that people with expertise in these areas, it's gold.
Thank you.
We have one last question, and that's with Emily Campbell at Lethbridge College.
Hey, Tara.
Hey,
good presentation. I think mine are very similar to Loda and Steve, but so from my staff perspective, it's that recognition of all the work that the bookstores already do on campus. That people, and particularly faculty, they don't realize all the ins and outs that we do, all the collaborating we do with all the other departments, how we are these frontline workers to students. And we're still dealing with all the students where many areas on the campus aren't, depending on, of course, which province you're in. But again, I think it's just about being present in the conversations at the beginning, then, fielding us out appropriately where, if we're not needed in that part, to kind of support what Steve had said, because I am now on the communication group for the whole college as well. So the bookstore, we have our own voice front and center, and it's made a ginormous impact for sure. But again, on the academic side, I think if we can align with the VPAs, the provosts, whomever we need to be at the table with, and again, just a quick drop down by the store, make sure everybody's doing okay. That goes for miles with staff, and just that appreciation of what we've already been doing.
And a lot of you must be feeling awfully lonely if your campuses are mostly shut down, but you're there hanging out, getting stuff to the students. You must wonder sometimes if people even remember that you're there.
Yeah, and I think that has been a big issue with a lot of staff for sure that are on campus, and nobody really acknowledges that. So that would just be something as a FYI.
Well, no, that's a really good point, Emily. And on behalf of all the VPs and provosts who might not have taken the time to thank you, all of you. We know that you are a lifeline to the students. We know that you are connecting to them, and often you're giving them pep talks or you're reassuring them, and that information doesn't even get up to anyone else. and I know you're doing it. So thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have to write an ode to bookstores.
Something to that would be well appreciated, I think, for across the country. But yeah, the mental health of our staff that are here every day is crucial.
It sure is. Absolutely. So I hope you're also taking care of yourselves.
So, thanks, Em. So thank you so much, Tara. I know we ran over a little bit of time here, but as a token of our appreciation for sharing your time with all of us today, CSU making a $500 donation to First Book Canada on behalf of all speakers presenting at this year's conference. So thank you once again for your presentation, and then I will let Greg touch base what's happening next.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tara. So that concludes our first session of the day. Our second session is a recap of 2020, as I mentioned earlier. That starts at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, which is 3 p.m. Atlantic, 1 p.m. Central, 12 noon Mountain, and 11 a.m. Pacific. So come back for that time, and thank you once again. Bye, everybody.
Keep well, everybody.